I mean, how much more secular can things get?
Bitcoin mining does not emit any CO2 at all. God lets bad things happen so that it creates opportunities for people to do things that are good. If it was empirical, it would remove any meaning from the word faith. Bitcoin definitely fixes more problems, I would argue, than almost any other technology in human history. I can have full conviction on Bitcoin. It's going to work.
Today I had the pleasure of talking to my friend Pierre Rochard, one of the most respected Bitcoin thinkers in the world today. Starting his Bitcoin career in 2012, he pioneered many concepts and practical ideas that all have become reality today. He has been professionally active in Bitcoin Lightning, Bitcoin mining, and advocating for Bitcoin policy on the highest levels of American politics. We discussed the recently announced U.S. Strategic Bitcoin Reserve and talked in depth about the parallels between Bitcoin and Christianity. Come join us in this conversation. Pierre, welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Terry.
Yeah, this is long overdue. I don't know if we ever have done kind of on camera anything.
Not a one-on-one like this. Maybe we've been on panels together and things like that, but This is great.
Yeah. So Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, I feel like we have to talk about it.
We have to, and at two levels. There's the state level and the federal level now. So the federal level exists. So Trump signed that executive order. So now it's official from, we can get into a debate about the philosophy of the executive branch and whether it's appropriate to do this via executive order, but nevertheless, it actually exists now. It's a bit of a relabeling of the Bitcoin that have been seized. And then at the state level...
Wait, but so Strategic Bitcoin Reserve,
yeah.
The idea is to build a reserve that is akin to the gold reserve? Is that like the underlying philosophy or what?
I think it's a little bit different because in my mind, like the gold reserve, it was all about backing the dollar directly, right? Of saying, having a fixed ratio between the dollar and gold of however many ounces. And then, of course, they would constantly hard fork and default. And, so whereas this is really the way that Trump has characterized it is that it's an opportunity to pay off the national debt after the value of the Bitcoin go up a lot. So it's speculative in the non-pejorative sense of that term of saying, hey, we're going to use this in the future for this purpose. And it's a long-term strategy around that. Whereas for gold, it was more that gold is almost like a legacy thing that they still have in reserve because at one point it did back the dollar and they just haven't gotten around to selling it, I suppose.
Yeah, and it does look like revaluing the gold. Maybe that could have played part of a role of kind of shoring up the dollar or dealing with the debt in some way.
Yeah, so the gold historically has been held at historical cost, which is like $35 an ounce or something like that. And given that now the dollar and gold freely float against each other, now gold has run up quite a lot against that historical cost. And so from an accounting perspective, normally a private company or a publicly traded company would revalue and mark up the gains, on the books. Historically, the Fed has not done that, or the Treasury has not done that. And so they could realize those gains. It's a bit of just an accounting sleight of hand. What would really, I think, be great would be then they actually go and sell the gold. And I think that, take the proceeds from the selling of gold to buy more Bitcoin.
So sell the analog Bitcoin and buy some real Bitcoin.
Exactly. And I think that, for Trump, he likes gold. Right. If you look at his residences, if it has an aesthetic that has been universally shared throughout millennia by people. Right. And that the utility of gold needs to go back to being jewelry or being used for electronics. In fact, the increase in the price of gold has created an issue for manufacturers that now, gold is an input commodity with utility, as people like to point out. And so it would be great to push down the price of gold, make it abundant, so that people can actually use it for its purposes rather than it sitting in Fort Knox collecting dust, assuming it's still there.
Yeah, I've been keeping track of the gold price for the last 15 years or so, and I kept on thinking, well, gold is going to become demonetized, and and you kind of can see some of that effect, I think, but it's still outperforming the other commodities if you put them together as a basket. So basically, you're saying maybe we don't need that for gold to have that extra monetary quality.
Well, it might be the case that even if the U.S. government sells all their gold, that other countries, other individuals still want to hold gold as a store of value. But as I think Safety made this point really well in his book of, if you hold on to the demonetizing asset, you're going to lose your purchasing power relative to the monetizing asset, which is Bitcoin. And so even if gold has a better difficulty adjustment than other commodities, right? Where, the gold price can go up without immediately resulting in lots more gold production. It's still worse than Bitcoin. And it's kind of a similar argument with the dollar, right? That the dollar is the least worst fiat currency. Gold is the least worst commodity. But they've got to go.
Yeah. And I want to ask you more about the strategic Bitcoin reserve, because I think a lot of people don't know. As far as I know, you were the first person to come out and say, hey, the U.S. has a bunch of Bitcoin. It needs to hold on to this. We need to write into law that the U.S. Marshals have to hold on to, U.S. government's Bitcoin. And that was, I think, 4 years ago, right?
Yeah. So this was, so in November of 2020, the IRS seized a substantial amount of Bitcoin. And then there was a big budget battle in DC. As there's always a budget battle of them trying to figure out how to cut spending and raise taxes and all of this. And so I proposed that an opportunity here is to not sell the Bitcoin that had been seized by the IRS and also other Bitcoin that were still on the balance sheet, with a HODL Act that it didn't specify that this is what we're going to use the Bitcoin for in the future. It's just saying, hey, let's put a pause on the U.S. Marshal Service selling these Bitcoin because we should have a strategic reserve of Bitcoin. So that was kind of the first time that this idea had crystallized. Obviously, it's not like a crazy idea in the sense that I've always, in any context, have told people don't sell your Bitcoin, hold Bitcoin for the long term. I just think that the same principle applies to government. It was controversial at the time because from a libertarian perspective, it seemed like if the government holds Bitcoin that have been seized, you are incentivizing the government to seize more Bitcoin.
You hear that talk now too.
Yeah. And I think that's misguided. I think that you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. Bitcoin changes the incentives, and that if we Bitcoinize government, then it becomes more libertarian, not less. And especially in the context of, Larry Fink is on national television saying Bitcoin is above governments. I couldn't have believed that somebody of his stature would say that, 5 years ago. But he's gone down the rabbit hole and he's realizing what reality is. And so when a government kisses the ring and, puts itself under the Bitcoin standard, I think that changes their incentives. It changes their mentality. And it's a very positive thing from a libertarian perspective of creating the right incentives for more liberty rather than less. Second of all, they're not going to seize more Bitcoin if they know they're going to hold it. They don't need additional incentives to seize Bitcoin. They just do it every opportunity they get because they're pursuing some kind of criminal justice, mandate. The government agents, in fact, in the Silk Road case, not only did they seize the Bitcoin on behalf of the government, they also stole the Bitcoin.
Yes.
So I don't think that...
I don't know if people know this, but individual agents were trying to get away with stealing the Bitcoin from the Silk Road, right?
And then they got prosecuted and they went to jail. So I don't buy the argument that like saying that we're going to hold it means that there's some kind of additional incentive to seize Bitcoin beyond what exists if we say we're going to sell it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you have people who say that, well, just return the Bitcoin that, from whom they were seized. And my response to that is twofold. Either the person whose Bitcoin were seized is a real criminal, in which case, like, I don't necessarily think that there's a strong argument for giving them Bitcoin, or they're innocent. And the only way to return the Bitcoin to them is to not sell it.
Yes.
If you sell it and then the Bitcoin price goes up, like now the taxpayers have to like buy it back to make them whole. It doesn't make sense. So it's one or the other, right? And so that's where I'm like, in either case, it's like, no, we should just hold it until the criminal justice system has made a determination that this person's guilty or innocent.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're talking about Bitcoinizing everybody, not just us, you and I, and individuals, but why not corporations, right, governments? And that reminds me, I was going back in time because I remember you kind of showing up on my feed back in 2012, 13. And the first article that I remember reading this, I think later, I think the first one I read of you was speculative attack for sure, and then there was probably one before that about fractional reserve banking, and the one you discussed with Michael Goldstein recently as well. So like, so my experience of you, it really was a surprise because here was somebody who understood economics deeply, but wrote about Bitcoin not just in this kind of academic, careful way, but it was just like you just like blasted on the scene and you spoke with so much clarity and confidence. And your articles weren't like 20 pages or 10 pages. It was like really brief stuff. And so the first one, at least that I know, Michael Goldstein has republished on the Satoshi Nakamoto website, the Nakamoto Institute website, is working and saving are revolutionary acts. Yeah. And I reread it this morning and I was like, man, that seems like, and tell me if I'm wrong, but that seems almost like a personal mission statement. Yeah, yeah. Like in a way it was like, how old were you back then? Like 23 or something?
I was still in college. I was, about to graduate. 22, 23. Yeah.
Yeah. And so to write about the thing that has been maybe even demonized or that's kind of taboo, and you're like, no, saving and working are revolutionary. So I guess, do you agree that was kind of like a personal mission statement? And then, does it tie into how you like were thinking about Bitcoin as well?
Yeah, 100%. So, I got into libertarianism and Austrian economics when I was in high school. So even earlier, this was when I was 15 years old.
But so, okay, I heard you say that before. Yeah. How does that work?
Yeah.
Okay, because like you're 15 and then here's something really esoteric.
Yeah.
Like, there must have been something intrinsic to that fascinated you, because back then there weren't any PhDs to pursue really, or right. Like what was the appeal for you?
It's very strange. So I went onto the front page of Wikipedia one day during summer between my sophomore and junior year in high school. And the featured article on that particular day was anarcho-capitalism.
No way.
Yeah. They have featured articles that they've deemed to be of high quality, which looking back on it is very surprising because Wikipedia has a reputation of kind of being a little bit left leaning, of like, maybe that wouldn't be a featured article that they would put on the front page. So, by the grace of God, there it was on the front page. And I thought to myself, this sounds controversial. Let me click on this. So I start reading it and I'm just like nodding my head. I'm like, yeah, this makes sense.
And so it's a combination of achieving anarchy through capitalism.
Well, it is the kind of the Rothbardian perspective that, you have property rights and you don't need a monopolist state that is, and so at the time I was living in France, arguably one of the most statist intellectual environments in the world. There was a survey actually that showed that as a percentage of the population, there are more Marxists in France than in communist China.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And, I was in the public education system there. Now, granted, it was kind of a special school because it was an international school, but it was still staffed by professors who had gone through the full Marxist indoctrination process to become a French school professor. So it was also a bit of a teenage rebellion, right? Of like, here's the diametric opposite of what's being taught. That sent me down the rabbit hole to the Mises Institute and signed up for their newsletter, started reading what they were writing, and then started downloading MP3 files onto my iPod.
That sounds so familiar. I used to burn them on CD-ROMs and then listen to them in my Discman. So Mises Institute, for the listeners who don't know, based in Alabama, focused on Austrian economics. I think it was founded when Mises was still alive, like the dean of the Austrian School of Economics, you could say. Wow. And so, you started digging into Austrian economics that way. And did you know anyone, like in high school? Like, did you know anyone personally ever?
Not at all, no. So that's the really great part about the internet. You can just be anywhere in the world. You can be surrounded by people who disagree with you, but you find something on the internet where there's thousands of us, who
there's dozens of us.
Yes, exactly. Tobias Chunke. I don't know if anyone's going to get it, but that's good. They're in Alabama. Like, I'm in France, but I'm listening to Walter Block explain how you could have a society that doesn't have a state. I was listening, and then what really caught my attention was the monetary economics, the Austrian business cycle theory. And when I stumbled onto that, I was like, okay, so here's something where they're explaining what's going on or what has happened throughout history, and nobody else gets it. Because it's not like, there's parts of economics where you can find commonality between Austrian school, neoclassical, Keynesian, and Marxist, right? They might all agree on supply and demand, the price goes up, the price goes down. But the thing that struck out to me as the most unique about the Austrians was that they actually had a coherent explanation for why there's a business cycle.
And business cycle 101, boom busts.
Yeah, exactly. And so saying that, okay, you got artificial credit expansion due to the monetary system, and that leads to bad entrepreneurial decisions that then cause a bust when they realize that there's not a possibility to monetize these investments. And so when that clicked for me, and, because the explanations of like Keynes saying, it's just, people's feelings, like sometimes,
animal spirits.
Yeah. Sometimes they're bullish, sometimes they're bearish, like that. I was like, or people saying, sometimes they're greedy, sometimes they're fearful. I'm like, no, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, humans are humans. Like, we don't really like change that way. So anyway, and I'm very logical, I like logic. And so when I was processing the different writings that I came across and different lectures, it made a ton of sense to me. And that's when I became really interested in the question of, okay, well, what is the best monetary system? And the conclusion I came to at the time was 100% reserve banking with gold. And I remember laying in bed one night thinking about this stuff, right, as one does as a teenager, and thinking to myself, well, gold supply, it increases a little bit over time. If you could have something where the supply did not increase at all, that would be better. But just like that was it. That was the end of the thought. And so I was definitely at the same time too. Something that's important to note is that I was learning about free software, open source software, and the philosophy behind it. I was listening to Richard Stallman talking about users should be able to modify the code of the software that they use. And I was also agonizing over like, I can't believe I'm using proprietary software. This is so like, icky, like it was like I was developing a principled stand there as well. And I was installing Linux on my parents' old computers, doing command line things. And so I was just like fully primed for Bitcoin to just drop into my world at some point. And that's eventually what happened.
And so was there any moment, because I know at some point you were familiar as well with, Ron Paul. And I think at the same time, you and I were aware of Ron Paul before he made a splash in the media, because he had a little committee and made like a kind of a clunky video in his living room, like announcing his candidacy for presidency, because he was associated with the Mises Institute. But so I guess my question is there a moment where you became a revolutionary, right? Because this is like, to say saving and working on revolutionary acts, and then of course, Bitcoin, I think by now it's clear, like this is something revolutionary. But I remember talking to developers early on who were just working on Bitcoin since 2010. And to them, it was like a cool project. But to you, it was a revolution. And so like, do you remember a moment where something clicked, or was it a decision that you're like, I'm going to apply myself or dedicate myself to this cause?
So that article, I think, was really a reaction to the activism that I would hear other libertarians promote on campus at the time, right? Where they're saying like, oh, we've got to do more to like print pamphlets and, get a bullhorn and get on your soapbox in the middle of campus and like convince people that libertarianism is a good idea.
And this was here in Austin?
Yeah. And I kind of had an allergic reaction to that of like, that is economically ignorant, and that, there's really two threads there. One is, we've got to wait for the system to collapse, right? So, I've of course studied the history of the Soviet Union. Like, we know that socialism collapses because it doesn't deliver on its promises, and so we've just got to wait for the right moment. Like, otherwise you're just pushing on a string. And second, that if we look at the history of humanity, this deepening of the division of labor, this lengthening of capital structures. We've got semiconductors. My dad worked in semiconductors, right? And so we've got more and more advanced technology, greater productivity. And so we have to focus on the positive, working, right? And harnessing that, and then saving to build up more capital, because ultimately I saw like capitalism is the way out. And it's like Elon Musk building a rocket. It's like that's the way to do it, rather than trying to do like political activism, is to build our way out of these problems. And so that was but that wasn't like somehow I had a mentor, who was telling me this. It was a visceral reaction to the arguments others were making that didn't seem logical to me.
And I imagine also just witnessing that kind of attitude of, well, we're the intellectuals, we're the libertarian intellectuals, so we respect the entrepreneurs, but they got to do the work. Yeah. Like, I feel like I've encountered that too, where, you have like tenured professors working at a government funded university, which, I don't condemn all of these people, but it is ironic kind of that to hear libertarian voices from people with that kind of background. Then it's like, okay, well, who's going to build the economy?
Yeah.
No, I think that makes total sense. I remember being a lot more, I guess I was just getting started with my career, and for the first time I was making a little bit of money, and And so I was very cautious in my writing about Bitcoin. I felt like I always had like my audience of investors in mind who are like jaded or whatever. And so I was much more like, well, you know, let's conceive of a hypothesis, what the price might do, you know, in the next 2 years. And let's leave open all the options, you know, maybe Bitcoin would win or maybe something else or, so definitely felt very inspired by, you know, you and Michael and some other people who went at it. Like, I think there's some, okay. So do you feel like there's a link between studying economics, like real economics, not just kind of Keynesian drivel, but real economics, and kind of having longevity in the Bitcoin space? Like, do you see, is there a correlation there?
There is. I also think that, you know, when Bitcoin clicked for me, was, you know, when it was, somebody mentioned like there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoin, because then it brought together, you know, that proto Bitcoin idea I had, and that basically I had full conviction that 100% reserve banking, gold, those things were true. I had full conviction that free software, open source software is true. And so then it's like true plus true equals true. And so that's where, to me, it was like, yeah, I can have full conviction on Bitcoin. It's going to work. The only thing I was wrong about was the timing, really, of like, I thought, okay, well, I figured it out. Surely everybody else is going to figure this out, you know, within the next 3 months. And then the dollar won't exist anymore. You know, like, we'll just use Bitcoin.
Right.
Far more complicated than that.
Here we are 13 years later.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, on one hand, it's like, well, aren't you disappointed it didn't happen faster? And on the other hand, I'm like, the journey is what I'm here for now. And it's like, I like the journey. You know, maybe it's a good thing that it's taking longer than I expected, because it's, you know, given me so many blessings, like professionally and just experientially as a human. It's like, well, what would have I done with the rest of my life if Bitcoin had worked out overnight, right? Like, maybe I would have ruined my life. You know, I wouldn't have had anything to do. I'd have been, I'd have to work as an accountant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And I feel that Bitcoin also, as a, you know, once you start owning it and making decisions about it and with it and getting involved in entrepreneurial activities around it, it's a harsh master. Have you found that as well? That, you know, it's not needlessly cruel, but there is a kind of, your actions are going to have consequences no matter what. And of course you can make excuses or say like, oh, I didn't know, but ultimately, like, we all have to learn some lessons through Bitcoin. Like, there's no sugar daddy behind Bitcoin that's going to give you a nice bailout.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So I think, and this is where we can talk about Christianity as well, because I think that Bitcoin can drive people crazy. And we've seen people just go off the deep end because of Bitcoin. And it's, you know, also just like the intellectually, it's like you can go on so many forks and end up, you know, in crypto land. You can end up in BSV, like, or you can just rage quit and go work on like enterprise blockchain. And I think that, you know, the volatility of the Bitcoin price combined with the immutability of the blockchain, and then the entrepreneurial, you know, the foresight that you need of like, okay, if I could go back in time and do things differently, I would have this much more wealth, right? It's like that can destroy all of those things can just destroy people. And I think that's been, you know, perhaps the greatest cost of Bitcoin is that aspect of it,
or the greatest, you know, virtue of Bitcoin.
Well, if it can lead to, and you know, I think that God lets bad things happen when it can lead to, and it will lead to good things happening. Like, it's all part of the plan. But yeah, that's Yeah, it requires, and this gets into like a theological debate of like what, what's our role in the economy of grace. But I think that, in the good sense, like it creates opportunities to grow as a person, to grow closer to God, to like accept one's fate, right? And to also not put too much stock into what's going on in this world, but having like this balance between, not falling into avarice, not falling into greed, or falling into wanting what other people have, right?
The mimetic desire.
That hole in one's life, and then finding what truly matters.
Right.
God, family, all of this. So, what's truly good. In a way, like Bitcoin's like this sorting mechanism of, because it's neutral, that it is freedom. And as libertarians, like, when I was younger, I always thought of freedom as the end in itself, right?
Me too. Yeah, me too.
That's what we're working towards, is freedom. And then you get freedom and you realize, oh, wait, no, that's actually the means and the ultimate ends that Mises wrote about. You're not going to find them in human action. He tells you you're not going to find them.
He's literally saying it's about satisfaction of needs. And it's like, that's just the most inspirationless, series of words I can imagine. Like, your needs are satisfied.
And I think he's right in the sense that he's writing a book about praxeology. He's not writing a book about theology. And so you need both, right? You need to then ultimately combine the two, but he's not making a value judgment of, oh, your ultimate ends should be, Jesus Christ crucified on the cross, or, Buddha or whatever it is. Because he's writing about economics.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Although, I mean, that's a tangent, but I do disagree with Mises that, economics has to be value free, and that principles of natural law have no business in economics, because but that's a whole rabbit hole. But I wanted to ask you about you discovering Christianity, or maybe rediscovering, because we both grew up in kind of actually not that far from each other. Like I grew up in Bruges, you grew up in Paris, and then Normandy. That's more or less where your family's from, or
Brittany on the
Brittany. Okay, so further away then, still, but still, not that far, and historically Catholic, but then over the decades, grown more and more secular. And to the extent that I'm wondering, like, have we already witnessed, or are we witnessing kind of like a bottom in the bear market of, I mean, how much more secular can things get? But so, I understand from our conversations before that, you've been rediscovering like things about Christianity that you appreciate, and the same goes for me. Like I've also been digging into scriptures and theology, and I used to me the thing that was so amazing about human action and Mises was like just having somebody write that the truth is real and the truth exists, and it's a worthy pursuit, and then he takes you on this journey of just this very elegant logic, where all of a sudden he's not just talking about abstract mathematics, he's talking about human beings, and then so that to me was like the beginning, I think, of this journey where I'm now like actively exploring Christianity, because I feel like there's a total continuity there. But so I'm curious, maybe as a way to kind of get into this or something, are there some similarities or parallels between like the 10-year path you had in Bitcoin and like digging into it and thinking about the mechanics of it, and then now what you're learning about Christianity? Like, are there any parallels that you're experiencing?
Yeah, 100%. So I think that first there's a causal relationship between the two at a high level, which is that Bitcoin is fundamentally, it dematerializes. And so, when you store your wealth on 12 or 24 words, now you're in it's almost like a bridge domain of, you're spending less money on the pleasures of life so that you can stack more sats. And so that means you're freed up on time. You're freed up on things that are occupying your brain space, right? And that creates a vacuum. And when you reduce materialism, that gets filled with spirituality, or nihilism, I suppose. But that wasn't, what I experienced. And then what form that spirituality can take, maybe people get into meditation or whatever, but or yoga or like some kind of secular type spirituality. But then when I really got into so similarly to my experience with anarcho-capitalism, what happened for me was that I was just staring at my window and a thought came to my head of Jesus died for our sins, which, is a meme, right? And so that's a very important parallel. Memetics is very strong with Christianity and with Bitcoin. So then I was like, okay, what does that meme mean? And so I turned to Wikipedia and went to the article on Jesus Christ and read through it. And by the end of it, I was crying. And I realized that I was a Christian. And so, went from somebody who was secular, agnostic, atheist to a Christian in basically the span of like an hour, right?
Wow.
And so that's my, I guess, reconversion, because I was baptized Catholic, but obviously I hadn't really thought about Jesus Christ very much until that point. That it really comes down to the issue of innocence and guilt, and that's when I was digging into like what does it mean for Jesus died for our sins, it pointed me in that direction, and it was very helpful for me because over the course of decades of living here on planet Earth, one sins and one accumulates a tremendous amount of guilt, and I'm a sinner, and that when you realize, okay, I've got this child here, I was a father of two at this point, and they are so innocent and I'm like, why are they innocent? Well, they're innocent because they don't know what they're doing. And when I read Jesus saying when he was nailed to the cross, forgive them for they know not what they do, I thought to myself, like, that is true for us adults too. Like I can't, I've got that's like such a profound insight that when that clicked for me, I was like, okay, there is truth here that is fundamentally transcends, because Bitcoiners are like, okay, Pierre, Christianity, how do you verify any of this stuff, right? Don't trust, verify. You weren't there in, you weren't there in Jerusalem. You didn't see this happen. How do you know it happened? And I'm like, well, okay, when rewinding to Austrian economics, when I read Human Action and it went through my filter or interpreter, in my brain, I was like, yes, that's true. Yes, that's true. Okay. It's all logical. And then when I read General Theory of, from Keynes, start reading it, I'm like, what is he talking about?
Yes.
This is nonsense. Okay. Go read Marx. Like I'm not, you could say, oh, you weren't open-minded enough. No, I was not open-minded. I was verifying to see, like, is this true to me? Or like, is this logical? Is this reasonable? Like I'm applying my brain to this and trying to find, whether I agree with this or not. And within Keynes, within Marx, within anyone else, yes, there are things I agree with, obviously. But as a work, it was like, okay, this guy is just spouting nonsense. I also read like Mishkin. He's got a whole textbook on money and banking that is very much from a traditional mainstream neoclassical neo-Keynesian perspective. I found lots of areas where I had common ground, and then I found things where I was like, this is obviously wrong and here's why. And then, when I read the New Testament, the gospel, and I'm reading it, I'm like, okay, this is true. And that, so it's almost like the verification to me was it was the fact that internally I knew it to be true. And I didn't need like carbon dating of the Shroud of Turin, like these kinds of like scientific, materialistic, you need like empirical evidence to know that it's true. No, not at all. It's almost like, it's a personal God, right? God, and it's you've got the Holy Spirit, in relation to Jesus, and you're reading things where I'm like, okay, I know this happened for a fact, not because I was there, not because I have any empirical evidence, but because I know it, and if it wasn't true, God would tell me it wasn't true, and so it's And I think it's very hard for like atheist agnostics to hear that.
Yeah.
So then they're like, oh, you're hearing voices in your head. It's like, well, not any differently than when I was reading Human Action and I was determining that it was true. Like I'm applying reason and also the spirit of my soul. Like it's like the body, the mind, and the soul. It's like, and it's verifying this. It's true. If I'm like a full node, right, and I'm verifying information that's coming in and checking it against, my protocol rules, and it's like, okay, yeah, this is so that's kind of
and so yeah, maybe that's what it's like for an altcoin node, which is like an atheist node looking at a Christian node and being like, what are you on about? I don't understand anything of what you're saying.
Yeah.
I have been wondering about Christianity in that sense, it's like, is in like kind of visualizing it as a network of people who, the more cold analysis is like, everybody follows the same protocol, therefore, peace and prosperity arises. But that doesn't mean that God is real. Like it's more kind of just maybe a Misesian like analysis of that. But I do think it really seems that for any kind of faith, there is a leap that is required, and it's extremely hard to put that into words. I think you can just kind of talk about your experience and at some point between all these conversations, for some people, all of a sudden something is going to click. Just like what we've experienced with Bitcoin. We just talk about Bitcoin all the time. And then we don't know what is going to, convince a person, but somehow it does. It just emerges.
So I think that leap that you're describing, I've come to the conclusion that it's that God wants us to have free will.
Yeah.
And so if it was empirical, you wouldn't really have any free will about it at all. And that it would remove any meaning from the word faith or belief. Like it would just be, and so, for example, when Trump was shot at in Butler, Pennsylvania, an atheist can look at that and say he got lucky. You can just explain it away. You don't have to like contend with the idea that a miracle happened. You can absolutely rationalize what just happened and say, well, it followed all the laws of physics. He just got lucky because he just like tilted his head by a centimeter. And then just move on with one's life, and so I think that like there's always an out of God wants you to have the ability to not have faith. If you want to deny God, that otherwise like it wouldn't be it almost like, I want to put it this way, like it wouldn't be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And you could also say that there's always a temptation, there's always a rationalization that can make you turn away from, I guess the truth, you could say, like just how like there's always another altcoin, meme coin that you can get excited about and start gambling with. It doesn't mean the truth doesn't exist. It doesn't mean Bitcoin doesn't exist, but yeah, you have the freedom to choose. And what are your thoughts on, because we talk a lot, and I do want to ask you more about that too, is like kind of how is Bitcoin going to change society. But there is this platitude that's, might be true, might not be, is like, change the money, change the world. I think it's true. Mm-hmm. You change the money, you change the world, but it doesn't mean Bitcoin fixes everything. So what are your thoughts on kind of how Christianity potentially fixes things? Because, obviously there's a lot of chaos in the world, and people are obviously looking at politics as a way, like trying to vote their way out of the problems, maybe trying to fix the debt. But is that enough? Like, what do you think?
So to me, like, Christianity has this dual, like, paradox. One is that the world is good. And so, there was in the early days of Christianity, and I think, there's still some people with this idea of, which is, from the Catholic perspective, a heretical idea of that the world is evil, and that, so it comes down to like that of, but also that you have to have a difficulty adjustment, right? You have to have, it has to be hard, otherwise it's not meaningful, and we haven't accomplished anything as souls, as people.
So you're comparing Christians with Bitcoin miners, which is like, and Bitcoin miners, they can't just mine the same or like run the same machines all the time because there's global competition. And as competition increases, the algorithm automatically adjusts the difficulty and makes it harder to mine.
Yeah.
So you're saying there's something to that in the everyday life,
yeah,
that in order to make life worthwhile, there has to be an increasing difficulty down the road.
That's right. Otherwise, life would be like when you play a video game and you just put in cheat codes, and then you just like do whatever you want, and then you're like, oh, okay, this is boring, and then you just like walk away because it completely removes any sense of accomplishment, and that you I think that would be a great path to resenting God and hating him, of like this, because it would just be so blah. That you would just, we already take it for granted, right? Like when we have it good, we already take it for granted. It would just take the amount of what we take for granted to an even greater extent if life was on super easy mode all the time. And so in order to, one metaphor I've heard as well is like, you've got to like stub your toe to find Jesus. Like that it is a way of, letting bad things happen so that you do good. And that God lets bad things happen so that it creates opportunities for people to do things that are good. So a natural disaster happens, it brings out all the philanthropy of people, and there's a kind of a thought there. So the idea that like, okay, Bitcoin, fix the money, fix the world. I think that taken to an extreme, it is bad in the sense that you're removing God from the equation, and you're kind of elevating Satoshi Nakamoto and Bitcoin into a space that is not spiritually healthy. But I think the idea as well is that we're here to sanctify the world, and we're here to make it good in God's name, and to help other humans, out of love, and to that God is creating this opportunity for us to do that. And so, the existence of Bitcoin in this world, I think, creates an opportunity for us to do good by going out and explaining the truth about Bitcoin, right? And doing what we do. And so, I don't want to like put ourselves on a pedestal of like, oh wow, we're doing God's work here, which is what the CEO of Goldman Sachs said at one point.
He did.
But that to the best of my knowledge, it is the case. Otherwise, I would be doing something else, right? I would. find something different to do if I didn't think that it was good what we're doing. So now, what happens after hyper Bitcoinization, and everyone's only using Bitcoin? Will people no longer sin? Will they? No, I don't think so. Right. But will we have accomplished something good? Yes, absolutely. So, for example, let's take a historical thing that happened. Right, Europeans came to the Americas. One of the things that they stopped from happening was human sacrifice at Aztec temples. So they did do something good in stopping those sacrifices. That was something bad. Did they also sin? Did they were there bad things? Yeah, 100%. And so I think that we can look at the general trend of history and say, is the world better post-Christianity, or not post-Christianity, post-Jesus Christ being here on earth with us? The development, I would argue the development of Christianity in the West is ultimately what led to capitalism and to the accumulation of goods and of rising living standards and reduced suffering for humans, because by its principles, it created net more peace on earth, right? And so, in particular, forgiving other people, right? So, we're constantly stepping on each other's toes. If we bear grudges and we get into family feuds and we're tribalist, violently, then we don't ever get ahead, right? Because we're just constantly fighting with each other instead of building together. If we're forgiving and we give each other, some grace, and we love our neighbors, then we can build together and actually improve our lot in life and lift ourselves up, lift each other up, in Christ's name. So that's where I'm yeah, Bitcoin's good. Bitcoin definitely fixes more problems, I would argue, than almost any other technology in human history. And there's lots of prerequisite technology that needed, electricity, for example. Yes, also did lots of good, and also a prerequisite for Bitcoin. But from a monetary economics perspective, from a monetary technology perspective, Bitcoin is it's almost like miraculous, and so that's I guess my perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so interesting to think about, I guess, the kind of Christian perspective, which is kind of you look at the actions of Christ and the things that he said, and that becomes kind of a template to follow. One of the books I've been reading has been around for 600 years, and it's called The Imitation of Christ, and so apparently that was, up until the 19th century, the most popular book in the world after the Bible. And so, yeah, it makes sense. Even just the title, people want to, follow that example to, for their own good and the betterment of the world. And so I guess I'm curious, what's your take on how strictly, ought this template to be followed? Because obviously there's many different interpretations of Christianity. There is the more, I guess people would call it the more strict kind, which is Catholicism, and then there's all kinds of Protestantism, probably other kinds that I haven't even heard of. But so, do you have in your mind kind of a verbal case for, this is what it means to be a full node, a full Christian node, and why?
Well, so I think from the Catholic perspective, we're all called to be saints. One theologian even put it this way: it's easy to be a saint. Don't do evil
what? How? Yeah. Don't do evil things.
Yeah, and do good things. We all know what's right and wrong. It's it's not complicated. But then we have we have the devil on our shoulders, and that, it's we have an evil inclination from the fall from the garden, and that we have all of that complexity and all of that struggle that gives us the ability to have free will, so that when we are good, it's actually something real. It's not just that that was the default, right? That oh well, you were going to save that person's life anyway. You're not a hero. It's like the fact that in that context, like somebody has an inclination to self-preserve, and so that maybe they wouldn't jump on a grenade or whatever it is. So I think that there's that evil inclination that is Satan and his spawns prowling the world to try to get people to do bad things, and that on the other side, there's that we do have free will, and so we can do better, and that we have historical examples, which are the saints that show just the fullest extent that humans can go. Now, obviously, the absolute apex predator of fullest extent of leaving it out all in the field is Jesus, right? And like what in his ministry and his passion, and since then there's just so many real examples. And this is like my favorite kind of book to read is about saints and what they did. I just finished reading a book about Saint Catherine of Siena, where you have this nobody from Siena who, just by her very small actions of going and helping as a nurse, this is during the bubonic plague, the absolute sickest people in the city, and this is medieval times. Like, it is horrifyingly disgusting. Far worse than the hospital you would go to today. It's like really just awful conditions, and so dedicated to doing that, but not because she wants credit for having done it, or she's getting a paycheck or anything like that, but because she spent years in her parents' closet praying to Jesus and praying the rosary, until finally Jesus told her, go out and heal the sick. And she went to do that because she was being told to do that, and then develops this reputation of being a miracle worker and of just being so devout. And then others start other within the church hierarchy are like, okay, this lady sounds like a crank. She sounds like some kind of witch. I'm going to go talk to her and see. She's probably got a massive ego, and, she's self-promoting herself, and how much of this is true. They go talk with her. They start asking her theological questions, and, much like a full node verification. Mm-hmm. And all of her responses are just so profound in their spiritual and theological maturity that they're like, whoa, who is this? They start following her. They're like, can I be, can I be a part of what you're doing? And then at the time, the Pope was in Avignon in France. And she hears from Jesus, you need to tell the Pope to come back to Rome. That's where the Pope should be. He should be in Rome. And she starts sending strongly worded letters to the Pope.
Wow.
Saying I love you. I have tremendous fidelity to you. You are my superior, but you are a coward. In no uncertain terms, right? Just toxic Bitcoin maximalism, right? Of you need to come back to Rome, and I don't care about your excuses. and ultimately succeeds in doing just that. And so then it's like, okay, then she gets canonized as a saint, right? And it's like, yes, obviously this person was a saint, and there's not, you can't go back and debate it, and then it goes into the empiricism question. It's like, okay, well, are you arguing that St. Catherine of Siena did not exist and that this is like a fabricated fairy tale, or that she was a real human who did real human things, but things that I wouldn't be capable of doing, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I'll be the first to admit, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do what she did. When I was reading it, I was just like trying to put myself in her position. And I'm like, no, I would be like some of the other characters in the story who are just, drinking wine and having a party and just having a good time and like getting into fights with others in the street. And, that was Italy, at this point in time. And, but at the same time that they were struggling with sin, they were coming to her and saying, how can I improve spiritually? And that, there's so many stories of, princes with tremendous egos thinking of like, not wanting to run into her because they were afraid that they would be converted and become monks.
Wow, sort of like the sophists in Athens. Like, I don't want to run into Socrates because, well, not only they would get embarrassed, no, they're afraid that they're going to have to disavow their worldly possessions and then go to the monastery.
Yeah, that she would succeed. Wow. Because just her aura, her presence, like it'll orange pill you, it'll Christ pill you.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so you're bringing that up because Catholicism has this long tradition of venerating saints. And so I'm curious, are you able to steelman that? Like, from the Protestant point of view, like, why don't you just stick with the Bible? What's with the smells and bells,
Yeah.
But no, like specifically about saints, like, have you ever read any kind of reasonable sounding criticism, or just curious?
Well, I think that the Protestants would turn to this idea of essentially predestination, of saying, yeah, they were always going to be saints, and they're not good people because of what they did. They're good people because of their faith in Jesus Christ. And that, that they were able to do that is, sure, that's fine, but it's not, that's not what saved their souls. And we shouldn't try to like say that, we've all got to like work towards being better people and that will get us into heaven. No, it's just, faith alone, right? I think that's the Protestant idea in a nutshell. Mm. And that the Catholic steel man is that if you have Jesus in your heart, he's going to tell you what to do. So are you going to listen to him, or are you just going to be like, well, I have him in my heart. And
yeah.
I'm just going to go sin. And
lip service.
Well, I don't want to, really, rile up the Protestants and start another war, which, unfortunately has been something that has happened in the past. Sometimes, 100 years at a time of so I do like ecumenical approaches to Christianity, and I listen to plenty of Protestant worship music where I'm like, yeah, this is true. I like this. And I've also met lots of Protestants who do good work and who, are, by any account, I'm like, yeah, there's nothing, there's no friction between us. It's like, it's fine. But I think that, I do love Catholicism, in all its parts. The aesthetics. I think that beauty is important. Mm. I think that tradition is important. I think hierarchy is important. I think that if we look back on the Bible, there were Christians before the Bible was written down. And so if you say, well, the Bible only, the New Testament was before the New Testament was written down. Then you're in a difficult position to explain what the early church was, and so when that Roman centurion looked up to Jesus on the cross and said, he really is God, and was like converted on the spot. Like, he didn't read the Bible. Okay, he was living it, but it's like it's so I think that the New Testament is part of the Catholic tradition, and it's a obviously critical part of it. And I don't want to like go too far in the other direction of saying, oh, we don't care about the Bible, because I think that is hugely problematic as well. I think everything should always be, like flowing from that source, because I think that it's the best testimony to what happened and why it matters. But that the deposit of faith is not just that alone, and that we've also, from my perspective, from the Catholic perspective, there have been tremendous miracles that have happened since. So for example, in Portugal, Marian apparitions at Fatima. I think that that's an area where, if you talk with a Protestant, they'll like roll their eyes, and I'm like, well, hold on, like a miracle happened there, and that when we go the step further, saying, okay, back to the question of verification, like how do you verify that happened? And it's like, well, one of the messages was like, pray the rosary. And this is something that I started doing, and every time I do it, including earlier today, it's like I get one way to describe the rosary is like it's like a way of untying knots. So we're always tying ourselves into knots, right? Mentally, spiritually. It's like so. Then you go pray, and it's very meditative. And it's also very strongly infused with the whole life of Christ, because that's what praying the rosary is going through all of kind of the highlights of Christ's ministry and passion. And so when you do that, and then as you're doing this, you're like reflecting on whatever is bothering you, like whatever is preoccupying you, and it ties into kind of the spiritual lessons in there of like, you might have one part that's like about humility, and you're like, yeah, I'm being too proud. That's the problem here. And then like almost like come out of it with like action items of like, okay, here's what I need to do in order to like, do right by God, and to also just like find solutions to problems. And so then it's like, okay, well, how do you know that the praying the rosary is good from a Christian's perspective? And I'm like, well, I do it and I get good results. So it goes back to, Jesus saying like, judge the tree by its fruits. Well, the fruit is good. So like, that's the verification. I don't really need more than that of like, I don't need a Marian apparition to happen to me right now in order for me to like verify anything.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't tried it myself, but there's various things to that where it's like, well, just try it, just see what happens. And I think it ties into maybe, to me at least, I feel like I'm discovering some humility, where it was like, I thought I knew better than like 2,000 years of tradition, right? And then something I was thinking about as you were talking as well is that I asked a friend of mine who became Catholic, and it's like, how did that happen? And the short of it was, Well, Catholicism knows how to deal with evil. They specialize in, like honing down on it, and even like exorcism and stuff like that. That's kind of on the extreme side, but I never really thought about it that way. To me, Catholicism was more, stuffy and big churches and
it can be that.
Of course, yeah. Well, and I guess also for context, like I grew up in Belgium, which the more I learn about history is like, well, we had it good for a really long time. Whereas if you lived more on the edges of Europe, like for example, by the Mediterranean and stuff, there was a lot of battle going on that was, just kind of inflicted in waves of invasions and things like that. And so I think it's not a coincidence that when you look at the map and look at like, where the strong Catholic countries, well, that's kind of like the firewall around Europe, and then in the interior, which is kind of, the land of milk and honey where kind of I'm from, I think it makes sense that then because of what you're saying, there was less difficulty adjustments needed. And so kind of, I wonder if Catholicism kind of got hollowed out in those areas, maybe sooner than in other areas. And then, Protestantism emerged maybe from that of like, hey, like, this isn't working. Like, we need to try something else. Maybe we got to get rid of all these statues. And, but anyway, so now that, and I know some people in my audience won't agree, but I think Western Europe is in deep trouble, more even so than Central Europe and other places in the world. So it's almost like the world is upside down now. I just wonder if, maybe Catholicism could be one of the avenues for people to explore of like, these guys have been, working on. And there's so many words like heresies. There's so many loaded words that make people always imagine this like, Catholic priest with a whip or something, who's got a like, you're born sinful and you're a sinner. And I don't know, like I guess I'm just talking here. But one of the things that really struck me recently is like, oh yeah, that's true. Like Catholicism has that tradition of fighting evil. And then I don't know, I felt the last 10 years, part of the little thing that I try and do in the Bitcoin world is like speaking out if people do bad things, be it trying to change Bitcoin, trying to pretend to be better than Bitcoin, and so I don't know. I'm just fascinated by the, that one part of life is like you try to be good, but another part is like, well, you try and learn to identify evil and get good at fighting it too. It doesn't have to be with weapons, but
yeah, and I think that for the Catholic Church, for the most part, with some notable exceptions, the way it's been fought is by speaking the truth, and so it's almost like, and when you speak the truth, you might not even be talking about anyone in particular or what they've done wrong, but what if you're like, you shouldn't steal. And then somebody's like, well, who are you to judge? It's like, have you been stealing? Like, why are you having that reaction?
Right.
It's like the ego defense is to put it in strong terms, it's a demonic force, and it's screaming out, and like the light is being shined upon it, and it is under attack, and so. The way it responds is like with moral relativism, with fallacies, right? Logical fallacies of saying like, oh, well, look, the New Testament says you shouldn't judge others, so you're not allowed to say that stealing is bad. It's like, no, I never made the accusation that you were stealing. Okay, so it's kind of the same thing in Bitcoin where it's like, scamming is bad. And then the scammers are like, don't be toxic. It's like, well, that's interesting. I didn't call you a scammer, but okay, interesting.
Yeah,
you had that reaction, and so there is a the parallel there.
And then also what I've noticed with your writing and even with that video you made is that there's a way to show people the truth without saying it bluntly. And you have this, like, you really have this knack of like being witty. I feel I don't know what, it often cracks me up. And I think what cracks me up is that, I don't know if you'll agree, but that you kind of play the dumb guy where you're like, oh, so you're saying this, Brad Garlinghouse, what was he saying again? Well, basically he wants the government to buy Ripple, like his shitcoin. And then you're like, oh, but okay, why don't you buy Ripple? Like you've been selling Ripple for 10 years. Yeah. So, and then the carbon dioxide video, oh my God. Can you tell the story about that?
Yeah, sure. So I got an email in my inbox that the New York Times was writing an article about Riot and they were asking, hey, can you verify that these are your carbon emissions? Like, because as part of their fact checking. And I just laughed out loud when I read that because, it's just, I immediately knew what I was going to do. And so, that's what Bitcoiners do.
It's like the joke was writing itself.
Yeah, because they did want to conflate two different things, which is direct carbon emissions from, a physical perspective, and indirect carbon emissions where through some causal mechanism, because of your activities, somebody else is emitting direct emissions. And part of the...
So basically they were trying to say Bitcoin is bad because Bitcoin miners put out pollutants, carbon dioxide.
Because Bitcoin miners pay electricity companies to pollute. Or that, that there's this negative externality that is not directly from the Bitcoin miners, but through the transitive property, because we're buying the electricity from these companies, that we're responsible for them. And so it's a purely ideological attack, because if you think about it from a legal property rights perspective, it's an absurd accusation. It would be like you go to a supermarket, you buy some things, and the store clerk injures themselves. And it's like, well, they wouldn't have injured themselves if you weren't buying that, and so you're actually responsible for their injury. Like the world would be completely unworkable if, and from a legal perspective, it's called vicarious liability, where it's like, yeah, you weren't like directly, doing it, but if you hadn't done this, then this wouldn't have happened, and nothing would. We'd constantly be suing each other if this was, a real thing. And that also, when you look at with the ozone layer, right? So back in the 90s, it was like, okay, there's this ozone hole. It's going to destroy the upper atmosphere. It was destroying the upper atmosphere. We have to get rid of CFCs that, are these gases that are being emitted from different processes. And so they had what was called the Montreal Accord. And the Montreal Accord said, okay, we are going to stop the direct emission of CFCs in order to stop the deterioration of the ozone layer. They signed it, they did it, they banned the emissions of CFCs gradually, and then the ozone layer repaired itself, and nobody talks about the ozone layer anymore because we solved that problem by going after the direct emissions. Okay, so why can't they do that the same with carbon emissions? Well, so they put together this corporate greenhouse gas council or whatever that was dominated by oil and gas, and they were like, oh, we're going to create an accounting system where essentially they can offload their liabilities onto the public and say, we're not emitting carbon emissions, you are. So if you want there to be fewer carbon emissions, that's on you, the consumer, to do that. And so anyway, it was a very cynical sleight of hand that they played in order to socialize the liability and to avoid what happened with the Montreal Protocol. And, in their defense, they're right in the sense that it would be completely unworkable to ban direct emissions of carbon. It would send us back to the Stone Age. And so they're trying to, if we blame everyone, then nobody's to blame and we can't do anything. Introduce an element of paralysis. But it also got weaponized by environmentalists to be like, okay, well, with this new carbon footprint economy, we can decide who is good and who is bad. By the way, just as a sidetrack, there was
a series. I didn't. There was a guy in Belgium who committed himself to have a zero carbon footprint, and so the state television started following him, and he had like two kids. I think they were like 7 and 11 or something. And of course, he was a divorced guy and very like environmentally active, but he was so miserable because he was like riding his little shitty bike to then generate electricity to have, and his kids were complaining, and then he was riding his bike. It was just completely miserable. But I guess that was the point of the state television, is to tell everyone, unless you're completely miserable like this person, you're a bad person, which is what the New York Times was trying to accuse you guys of, because you were working at Riot at the time. Like, you were basically representing a mining company, right?
Yeah. And so when they came out and were doing the fact checking for this article, I went out to the facility using a CO2 monitor with our excellent videographer, Gabe. I explained to him, we're going to do a Bill Nye the Science Guy video. And he has a great sense of humor, too, as well. And so, what was like, you want to work with people where, like, you're on the same wavelength, you trust each other, you know what you're doing. And so, when we were recording, I was trying to make him laugh, right? Like, I could see him smiling. And so that's, I think, what brought out my sense of humor there is just that, like, very personal collaboration I had with Gabe. And then he sent it to me. After editing, and like he did a masterful job editing it, like the timing of it is just like perfect.
So basically you went out to the facility measuring the CO2 levels so everywhere.
We started out on there's like a green field behind the facility, and so but it's like a green field that was leveled, right? So there used to be like a hill and forest there, and it got leveled for future development potentially, and so there was just weeds growing there. It didn't look like that visually appealing, but I played it up of we're out in nature, and Rockdale has the freshest air, and that we've got these beautiful plants here that are emitting oxygen by consuming CO2, and so let's take the measurement here. It's 450 parts per million, totally standard, and then we took it inside the facility. And there's two kinds of buildings at the Rockdale facility. There's immersion buildings where the computers, the Bitcoin mining rigs, are in a kind of mineral oil, and that gets circulated out to basically dry coolers outside, or like HVAC units that are removing that heat. And so inside there, it's very quiet. And it's just kind of like you've got aquariums, So took the CO2 measurement in there. The CO2 levels actually went down, which I wasn't expecting, right? I was expecting it to just be like 450, like outside. And then I did some research afterwards. It is the case that the mineral oil absorbs CO2.
Right.
And so it was just like very funny. And then we take it to the air-cooled building, which is very loud because you've got fans that are blowing the air through the mining rigs, and so I'm like yelling, the narrative, and then taking a measurement in there. It's 450 parts per million, and just coming to this conclusion that through our data gathering that Bitcoin mining does not emit any CO2 at all. So we sat on the video for several months.
Really?
And waited for the New York Times to publish their article.
Oh, right.
And so the moment that they tweeted out their article, on the company account, we replied with the video, Bitcoin mining does not emit any CO2. And things just went nuts because the Bitcoiners were like, yes, this is it's so funny. I mean, at that point I already had a bit of a reputation in the community of my sense of humor, but also like my seriousness about Bitcoin. And so to see me like in a hard hat and a yellow vest, just making fun of the New York Times at the largest Bitcoin mining facility in the world, Bitcoiners were just very excited about that and thought it was hilarious. The environmentalists did not find it funny at all.
I honestly, I wonder if that video put the nail in the coffin for that whole argument that Bitcoin is destroying the world and it's causing global warming. I mean, I haven't heard it since, honestly.
Yes, it did. And the reason why it did is because there's a saying in politics of if you're explaining, you're losing. So before that video, when people would talk about the carbon emissions from Bitcoin mining, the Bitcoin mining industry would say, oh, but we're actually using 50% renewables over here. And if you compare it to other industries, we actually, per megawatt, we're actually emitting less CO2 than other industries. And so we were explaining, right? And it's just like, and then with the video, it's very simple. Bitcoin mining doesn't emit carbon emissions. And then the environmentalists have to say, they have to get explaining. Oh, no, what we mean is by indirect carbon emissions because you have to buy the electricity from the company that, they're emitting carbon emissions at their natural gas power plant or their coal plant. And so then they're the ones explaining blah, 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 blah. And that, if for an outsider, you look at this and you're like, okay, yeah, these are just computers like I have in my office. Obviously, they don't emit any carbon emissions. And it's like, then from a policymaking perspective, then the argument is, if you want fewer carbon emissions, you need to regulate power plants. Full stop. The EPA is already regulating power plants. It's already there's already a thing here. There's already a rulemaking process for capping carbon emissions. So to then take it to the end users, that's just because you're politicizing it. You just don't like Bitcoin. Okay, let's have a debate about Bitcoin. Let's talk about Bitcoin. Now let's talk about the value of Bitcoin. Just completely changing the conversation. So then we started talking about the value of Bitcoin with politicians. And then they're like, well, should we have a strategic reserve? Because you spend an hour talking about how Bitcoin sends money and it's digital gold and it's good for the economy. It shifts the Overton window away from it's bad for the environment, we should ban it, it's for criminals, to hey, it's a great opportunity and it's time to fill the bag.
And so, okay, that was great, by the way. That was just, oh man, and it was such a great way to get back at the cabal, the media cabal.
And we ratioed the New York Times.
Yeah.
So we had more likes and retweets and views than they did. And then Elizabeth Warren posted that the same New York Times article. And again, we replied with the video. Again, we ratioed them, or her. And I think that, it broke the mold of corporate communications. Right? Traditional corporate communications, you put out a press release, it's boring, nobody reads it, nobody cares, you're the villain, you're making excuses for your, profiting off of destroying the environment. This was half tongue in cheek, tons of humor in it, entertaining, you watch it, you laugh, and it gets the message across. And from a crisis communications perspective, we broke all of the rules and achieved the result. And so this is something. There's a public relations expert I follow on Twitter. Her name is Lulu Musavi, I think, and she talks about this concept that in the 21st century, with social media, you need to go directly to your audience. Do not filter things through press releases, publicists, journalists. They're just going to step on the messaging and make it worse.
Yeah.
You need to be authentic and you have a direct line of communication with your audience. You don't need these other people in their traditional roles.
Yeah, and it's more and more that the people who do still use those channels, they're outing themselves as inauthentic just by virtue of still using the old channels.
Yeah.
So that's something I wonder about when stuff like this goes out, like people like Brad Garlinghouse, they follow you, they follow me, and then we're just like openly just joking about all this stuff and being direct, while they're like, oh, we're launching an institute to like start we're thinking about how to collaborate in the Bitcoin world, which is already like, no, that's going to be a way to attack Bitcoin. Yeah. But like, what do you think they think when they see us coming back at them and ratioing them? Do they just like shrug, or like does it jar them, or do they get more careful next time, or
they find ways to rationalize it? So they say like, Twitter's not real life, it's just social media, it doesn't matter. But what they don't realize is that you go into a politician's office. Let's say the politician is 70 years old. Their staff is 25 years old. Mm-hmm. Okay. You visit with them, you leave. The politician doesn't know what you just said. He turns to his staff and he says, what do you guys think? Your staff says, oh, Bitcoin's great. And it's the case that like the staff is on social media. In fact, the politician might say, I don't do social media. My staff does that for me. And so it's really the 20-somethings who see all of our messaging, who digest it, and who decide, basically, because they have the trust of the politician that hired them, they're like, okay, here's what's going to work, here's what's not going to work. And they kind of like are able to be the person who is laundering the social media messaging to the politician. And so, the people like Brad Garlinghouse or whatever, the inauthentic people who are speaking through press releases, they think of, the politicians like reading the newspaper and developing their views like that. It's like, no, they're developing their views based on what their staff is saying and the staff recommendations. And if they aren't, they're going to fire that staff because they don't have time they need to be out there fundraising with donors and shaking hands and meeting people on the street. They don't have time to go do in-depth research on these issues, and they don't have time to entertain to go through what the New York Times is saying. In fact, a lot of these politicians, they're anti-New York Times already. So if their staff comes to them and says, social media blew up today, New York Times tried arguing that Bitcoin mining is bad for the environment. Bitcoin miners came back strong. They said that this is all, a joke and it's a distraction. We agree with the Bitcoiners on this. Like, this is just Elizabeth Warren's thing, and she's just trying to attack this industry. And so it's like that's the dynamic that plays out in practice. That a lot of people they're still living in the 20th century.
Wow. And so tweeting is almost like the modern equivalent of write to your congressman.
100%. And I'd argue it's better. Assuming that it is being read by the staff, because the writing to your congressman, that might end up in the trash if you've got a bad congressman. If you've got a good congressman, they open it, they read it. Not the congressman, the staff.
Yeah.
But the staff, when they read your letter, they don't know how many people agree with you.
Yeah.
When they see that your tweet has 5,000 likes and everyone is responding to it very positively, then they're like, okay, not only did I receive the content of the message, I also understand the social context around it and how popular it is.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, in a democracy, the popularity of the argument is very important, almost just as important as the substance of the argument.
And so would you also say that there's a link now, or increasingly so or not, between what happens on social media and donor money for politicians? Do they make that link, and is it there?
So I think that I've read books about lobbying and public policy, and one framework to look at a politician and their incentives is that they have three priorities. One is money, as you mentioned, fundraising for the campaign. Two is votes, right? Which is something separate than money, actually. Three is the actual policy, is it good policy or not? And so I think that for social media, it is the combination of votes and policy ideas, and that the fundraising is kind of it's increasingly islanded, where it's almost like downstream. So in some ways, so there's the small dollar fundraising, right? Where, yeah, having good social media, then you send out fundraising calls and you're able to get, $100 from 1 million people or whatever. But really it's about realizing that the donor class and the voters, there's overlap there, right? So if you adopt a policy that is popular because people like it on social media, that then when you go speak with donors, they're also going to be happy about what you've accomplished. And so it's almost like they get real-time feedback that they know is going to correlate, not perfectly, but somewhat correlate with the big dollar donors like Elon Musk or, and I think Elon Musk represents almost like a very clear distillation of what I'm describing of this three-way intersection, because he plays it masterfully. I mean, he's a genius, obviously, right? Despite what AOC says, calling him an idiot. So yeah, it's been fascinating, and I play my small part in that, but it's been really interesting to see how that has an impact.
Yeah, I'm glad I asked, I'm glad you start talking about politics, because there's not that many Bitcoiners that actually are going into the rooms, talking to the politicians, proposing legislation.
Bitcoiners, I mean, I think there is the libertarian inclination of they hate it, but I also I speak to business people who say I don't have the patience for that, right? Because they if you're a CEO, an executive, you're used to telling people what to do and they do it. And if you go to a politician and you have that approach, that's not going to work at all.
Yeah.
Because that politician is going to be like, wow, okay, you don't understand you're not savvy.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of competing interests that the politician is having to balance. And it's not my way or the highway. It's, okay, we have a deliberative process and, that's not, yeah. So I think that that's where a lot of policymaking, it requires a tremendous amount of patience. And also that you have to be very careful of your credibility, because you walk into that room, they don't know who you are. They don't know if you're an OG. They don't know if you're a scammer. They don't know anything about you. It'd be great if they got briefed on that. And maybe with AI, I think it's going to get better and better of you ask AI of who is Pierre Rochard? What are his interests? What is he aligned with? And then, you would get a one pager without having to scroll through my social media for 10 days or whatever. So all that to say that if you go out and you give them false information or misleading information or things that just don't make sense, they write you off very quickly. They don't have time to for you to get to your point. A lot of these meetings are, less than 10 minutes. And so if you can't get your point across and what you're asking for, essentially, in a way that is tactful and diplomatic and savvy, then it's not going to work. And so I think that for a lot of Bitcoiners who are very individualistic and don't have an interest in it, then it's just, they can't effectively do that. I don't know why it is that I can. I've been told it's because I can really simplify it and meet people where they're at and just explain something very complicated, very simply, very quickly. So I think that works to my advantage in that context. And also that there's a tone to it, right? Where I can kind of speak with authority because I have a lot of conviction and confidence. And I also know that if they push back on it, I have it's on Twitter, I can be 50 replies deep into the thread and I'm still talking, right? Others, they might have a little bit less confidence because they're worried, well, what if they ask me a question that I don't know the answer to? And then it's like embarrassing, right? They don't want to embarrass themselves. Totally normal thing. But I think that arguing with people on Twitter has kind of given me the ability to like go into that situation with a little bit more confidence that, you know, I'll be able to figure things out and improvise on the fly, right? Because it's basically like tweeting, right? You've got 280 characters. So you put out your tweet, and then the politician, they usually don't ramble on and lecture you. They usually have their very concise reply. And so it's like
a little thread.
It's ping pong, like, you know, like, and so, and the moment you drop the ball and, you know, like they win the point, they're like, okay, well, this was a good meeting. Thank you. And so it's, it's very tactical.
Wow. That's fascinating. Yeah. Yeah. I guess there is a lot of proof of work that you build up, or I guess people talk about Bitcoin being a meritocracy as well, where you just kind of earn your stripes over time. But I do feel like, yes, the internet is just so open in that sense, where your work just accumulates over the years and your skill set related to all that work. Yeah, I definitely have noticed that too. Although I'm still not good at like debating someone in person. I think it's that I've done it a few times, but maybe I should try it again. It's just it gets under my skin.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It affects me for days sometimes. If somebody's very hardcore, bent on just, they don't believe in it and it's going to do this and that. And I'm there more for the audience, you know, debating, trying to make the case. It stressed me out.
No, I can be the same way as well. There's a famous debate between me and he's like an Italian computer science professor, OG Bitcoin skeptic.
Professor Bitcoin, him?
No. He was
Italian.
But anyway, he was saying it was a debate about whether Bitcoin's a Ponzi or not, and you know, I was yelling at him, and I was doing it like because like I don't respect him because he's just, you know, intellectually dishonest, and I was just having fun with it of just like, what can I get away with? But also like I was super agitated and wanted to, so, you know, it's like definitely a funny debate to listen to if anyone's interested.
I should check it out.
From a performance art perspective, but definitely not something that I want to do every day.
Yeah. What was I going to say? Well, so it seems like Bitcoin is already changed, because we were always talking about Bitcoin is going to change the world. And of course, we know individually, you know, people that have changed their lives because they're saving in Bitcoin, those kind of things. But from a kind of broader societal, political point of view, would you say Bitcoin is already changing the world? Like, did it like tip the election, you think? For example, I've heard, for example, the Trump election, for example, I think a full 5% of Trump voters were single issue, quote unquote, crypto owners. So maybe that was enough to tip it.
Perhaps. There is data that shows that it probably tipped Ohio, because there was Sherrod Brown versus Bernie Moreno there. And Sherrod Brown was the Democrat chair of the banking committee. And Bernie Moreno is like a pro Bitcoin crypto blockchain guy. And that, the Bitcoin Voter Project, which was started by the Bitcoin mining industry, ran advertisements there. And, there's, if you look at how close it was in an election, potentially, it was the decision maker. I think, though, that like when we look at the culture and the zeitgeist, as I call it, I think the zeitgeist it's hard to tell cause and effect of, is Bitcoin causing this zeitgeist of, let's say, like the Elon Musk, what used to be like the intellectual dark web, like anti-COVID hysteria, all of this, that the zeitgeist, is that caused by Bitcoin, or is Bitcoin a beneficiary of it? I think that's a really interesting question. I could argue that, like, as Bitcoin has kind of solidified in people's minds, that they become more disagreeable with arguments from authority,
or more comfortable with being disagreeable.
Yeah, and more interested in verification of, like, yeah, okay, you're saying that you have these credentials, but you were also saying that Bitcoin was going to go to zero. So,
right. And there's also an element of, I think, Bitcoin emboldens. Like, if you're a hodler, you're not indestructible, but in some respect, you're less easily thwarted than somebody who's, like, being a good house father and just has some dollars in the bank. Like, you know, we know what happened with the Canadian truckers. I do. That has surprised me, hearing individual stories of people saying, like, I was doing this radical thing and I kept going because I had some Bitcoin and I didn't need my day job and I just went for it, you know, and I think all those things probably add up, maybe to a lot more than we realize.
I think that's true. Yeah.
So I want to close with a question about the current cycle, which you actually written about, and you said, let me, oh yeah. So you think that this cycle is going to be longer and more temperate than previous cycles. So do you still think that? And what's your take?
I do still think that. I think that on the supply side, the halvings become less and less important over time, because we're talking about a smaller and smaller percentage of the Bitcoin economy. And that at this point, 94% of the Bitcoin have been mined.
So when inflation is dropping from like 2% to 1% or something like that, or is it less even?
Yeah. When Bitcoin miners are selling X percentage of the market cap, you know, before, let's say they were selling 10% of the market cap per year. Now, if they're selling 1% of the market cap per year, that's just a lot less Bitcoin that have to be absorbed by the market, by hodlers, to maintain the price. So there's that dynamic.
What about psychology though? Because I guess but I guess you may let me just first, before I steal, man, like, let me try to, you know, or devil's advocate, let me try to hear you out first. Sorry.
So I think that historically the halvings have caused a supply shock that was material, and that is a catalyst for psychology of, okay, well, now everybody's going to try to adopt Bitcoin at the same time, and you've got then on top of that the leveraged traders and the FOMO and then the parabolic top, and then of course you run out of money and then it crashes and then there's a bear market. And so the psychology, I feel like, was triggered by the halvings. And that, you know, it's okay. So then from there, on the demand side, I think that the demand is far less get rich quick speculative in the negative sense of the term, short-term traders, and far more, oh, okay, this is a long-term strategy, right? This is something that going to want to accumulate over many years and hold it for a long period of time. And I'm not just trying to catch the bottom and, you know, cash out at the top.
It's also different entities. Like it's very large corporations, it's governments, it's states. Yeah. Those are very different from a 20-year-old college kid.
That's right. And so I think that on the demand side, that's now on the supply side, it's not just the Bitcoin miners, because we also have to think about what I call like the rebalancers, right? The people who buy Bitcoin at $100, now when it's $100,000, they want to put their kids through college. They want to pay off their parents' mortgage. They want to donate to their charity, buy a Lambo, whatever it is, or just take some chips off the table, get some stocks and bonds, you know, and not be like 100% Bitcoin. And so they are the ones who ultimately are pushing down the price the most, in my estimation. And so it's like, okay, the demand has to digest that supply of the wealth effect of the rebalancers. And so then where does that leave us? I think that the psychology is still going to be triggered in the sense that you've got this finite scarcity. So even if there's not that big supply shock of the halving, there's still going to be the fact that the Bitcoin price is going to continue to drift upwards, and that is enough of a catalyst to trigger that psychology of FOMO, I need to buy, and then the kind of continuous iteration of that. And then, of course, the pullbacks, right? There's going to be big corrections like we're currently seeing. But it's an interesting question of, okay, now that we don't have this big trigger of the halving with the big parabolic top and then the big pullback, and the pullback is really bad for psychology, right? It actually pushes adoption away. If you have mild pullbacks where it's like, oh, I'm going to buy the dip, but it's not like despair and like pushing
I'm
away
down
the
80%.
Yeah. And Bitcoin's dead. Maybe because we don't have the parabolic top and the 80% drawdown, then that means that we can have a very long bull market that goes far higher than we would have expected otherwise, just over a longer period of time with these 40% corrections along the way because of the leveraged traders and all of that. And so that's kind of my thesis for a super cycle this time.
So how long is very long?
Yeah. So if we look at other market cycles, right, outside of Bitcoin, it's more traditional to have an 8 or 12-year cycle than to have a 4-year cycle. So I think the 4-year cycle is artificial due to the halvings, and that the more natural macro cycles are on the time frame of 8 to 12 to maybe even 16 years. And that then it's like, okay, but if we layer on top of that our understanding of Bitcoin and that, there is no top, like, yeah, it may be that eventually you get to the gradually then suddenly part.
Yeah, because fiat also is, in trouble around the world. You're just seeing it everywhere. Yeah. With the bond markets seem to be crashing, like gradually, like Japan now and Europe probably next.
I think that's another headwind that I should bring up, though, is monetary policy, right? So, and fiscal policy. So here in the U.S. right now, monetary policy is relatively tight compared to where it has been in the past. And fiscal policy is tightening with Trump's approach to tariffs and to government spending. So all that is contractionary in the very short term, which I think is obviously healthy, right? Because that's how we right the ship. But it also means that for Bitcoin, that's a huge headwind because ultimately Bitcoin's competing against the dollar. That's the price fight here. And so if the dollar is strengthening because Trump is, not printing more and they're raising interest rates or keeping them the same. But eventually we all know that by the nature of the fractional reserve banking system, there's going to be seizures from a medical term of, the system is going to go haywire and there's going to be problems in the banking system. And so they will have to eventually print money and ease things, and then that'll be a massive tailwind for Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, because don't you think with all the talk about reshoring industry back to the U.S. and we got to start making our own things, and even J.D. Vance understanding that we've been exporting cheap dollars, and as a result, we've have to give away all our productive capacity. So if they want to turn that around, don't they need a weak dollar?
So I think that, not with tariffs, right? So they can try to thread the needle that way. It's still an open question as to whether there's a successful way of doing that in the current context of the U.S. world reserve currency. So maybe the only way we get there is by Bitcoin replacing the dollar as the world reserve currency. And maybe the smoothest way to do that is with a strategic Bitcoin reserve of gradually backing the dollar with Bitcoin, and then eventually basically doing the opposite of what we did with gold, right? Where you move from, like, let's say a species standard of physical gold, with coins, and then to paper, and then you break the linkage. Then you go the opposite. You go paper, you add a little bit of a loose linkage, right? You still have them freely floating, but you start backing it more and more with Bitcoin. And then eventually you say $1 equals 1 sat, and we don't use dollars anymore.
All roads lead to Bitcoin. Let's end on that note. Thanks, Pierre.
Hey, thank you.